Difficult choices, heroes of the faith. We're going to be talking about Noah. But if you remember, last week I gave you a homework question. Anybody remember what the homework question was? The most difficult decision you've ever made. Now, I think there will be 3 people who are going to share what that is. You don't have to tell what decision you made about it, but just in general situation. Okay?
3 years ago, I had to move Jamie to Ohio, my youngest child, to Ohio, to hopefully give her a better life. It turns out it's pretty much the same or worse or whatever. And that was the hardest. And she graduated. She says she's coming back home when she graduates this year. So.
I remember you talking about that. I remember you talking about it on Facebook, and I heard you talk about it sometimes. Yeah. Who else remember the hardest decision they ever had to make? For me, one of the hardest decisions was to stay in Charlotte after my interim year was up. I love those people. I love that church, but my honey, all y'all were still here. It was hard to stay down there. Anybody else? I want to tell you about an MCC person who had to make a hard decision. And his name is Reverend Jimmy Brock. Jimmy passed away in 1998. I first met Jimmy in 1976 in Norfolk at Scope Auditorium, and he was on the stage preaching at the Southern Baptist Convention. And the reason his name caught my attention for some reason, but he looked like Captain Kangaroo. He looked just like Captain Kangaroo. So you know those things that pop in your mind. And lo and behold, several years later, probably in the late 1980s, I was at a general conference for MCC, and this gentleman got up to preach that night. And I looked at the name and I thought, Jimmy Brock, that sounds familiar. And then he got up on stage and I thought, oh my gosh, it's Captain Kangaroo. And so I was just I had to go find him and tell him this. You know, we talked a little bit. But the hard decision he had to make was to come out as a gay man and to step away from having been a Southern Baptist preacher for 30 years. He was married for over 25 of those years. He started in Atlanta, and then he came to Joy MCC in Florida in 1983. He led that church in a campaign to buy property, and they did that in 1997. They were the first LGBT group to own property in Central California. His daughter Lily became an MCC pastor also, and it was always interesting to see them on stage together. Lesbian daughter, gay dad, both preachers. His hard choice was he had to choose to be himself. He had to choose to leave his comfort zone. When he left the Southern Baptist Convention, MCC didn't have anything close to a retirement program, but he left and went to that. He then also had to choose between retirement and getting back in the saddle. I can relate to that. So when I think about hard decisions, I often think about Jimmy. I'm sure there were a lot of his friends that heard him preach in 1976 that did not hear him preach in 1987, 89, and probably never would. But he was just a delightful man. He was really well known in the Florida community, and he just lived life with joy those last years of his life. So we're talking here about Noah. Did anybody see that movie that was kind of like Noah's Ark? Mm-hmm. Evan Almighty. Remember that movie?
Pieces of it. I don't think I watched the whole thing.
This guy suddenly starts getting these messages that he's supposed to do something. And if you remember, and I can't remember who the actor's name is, the more he tries to walk away from this stuff, his beard starts growing. Remember that? And he would come home from work and there'd be these huge deliveries of wood out in his yard. And then all of a sudden, animals started showing up. And eventually he builds the ark and blah, 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 blah. But as I was studying about Noah today, I thought, boy, he was on a fast track. Because the real Noah story didn't come together quite that easily. nor quite that quickly. If you look at your sheet, first we're going to read Hebrews 11:7. This wonderful writer of Hebrews who brings up all these heroes and sheroes of the faith. 11:7, by faith Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. By his faith he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. There's some words in there that bothers me. Condemn. In the Message it says, by faith Noah built a ship in the middle of dry land. He was warned about something he couldn't see and acted on what he was told. The result? His family was saved. His act of faith drew a sharp line between the evil of the unbelieving world and the rightness of the believing world. As a result, Noah became intimate with God. Remember that little song, Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord? I don't know the rest of the words, just song kept popping through. And then if we wanted to read the whole Noah story, we'd be reading for a long time. But we're going to read just a few of these verses. And in fact, we're kind of read them as they come up in the questions, because I'm trusting that you saw online or somewhere from your sheet, and you read the 6th chapter, almost all the 6th chapter of Genesis. Hebrews say that Noah, God told Noah about things he had not yet seen. What kind of things would Noah not have seen when God started dealing with him?
What was to come?
What was to come? What else? There's a good chance, and if you go back and look through verses and try to figure this out, there's a good chance that it may not have rained since creation, if the water came up through the ground. So Noah, he's telling us it's going to rain 40 days and 40 days. What's rain? And even if he had seen rain, there's a good chance he had not seen a flood. We're going to take the story just as it's written. Also, if he's living hundreds of miles inland from any water, and God tells him to build a boat, what else was going to be on that boat besides him and his kids and wife?
Critters.
Critters. Okay, think about what kind of animals he would have seen there. Think about what other kinds of animals. Can you imagine an alligator showing up in the middle of the desert? Can you imagine an elephant, a chimpanzee? I love that cartoon where it shows the unicorns, and they're stuck on an island and says, oh, was that today?
Yeah.
So it's kind of amazing that God tells this thing to Noah, and he just steps out and starts doing what God asked him to. His obedient faith helped him be a survivor, and as Hebrews say, find favor in God's eyes. Maybe the question I should have asked is, what's the craziest thing God's ever asked you to do? I know some of you, and I don't want you to tell that one. Don't tell that story. Why did God choose Noah and his family to be the survivors? Now tell me you haven't wondered about that. Here's all these people on the face of the earth, and God goes to this one guy and his kids and his wife and chooses them. Why?
He was faithful. I mean, he lived on his faith.
He was faithful.
I don't
He
want
was
to say
faithful. It
easy.
said he found favor. That word actually means grace. Noah found grace. He didn't earn it. He didn't have any Sunday school pens. Remember those Sunday school attendance pens? He didn't have any of those to prove to God. He didn't have a giving record. He couldn't show how much he'd given. In some way, in his own unique way, because this is way over in Genesis. Have we had any laws given yet? No. This is way early. And in his own way, whatever he knew, he was being faithful to God. We get caught up in thinking we have to earn everything. I had a friend used to be, you'd give her something and she'd say, I haven't earned that. And I'd say, that's why it's a gift. So Noah, for whatever reason, God found him in favor. He didn't earn it. Does that cause anybody any trouble? It always has me.
He used to, not now.
Yeah, it still bothers me some. What about Shem over here? Or what about this one over here? What about David? Not David, but David. You know. We're going to find out in a minute that it wasn't all that totally capricious. Genesis 6, verses 8 and 9. But Noah was different. God liked what God saw in Noah. This is the story of Noah. He was a good man, a man of integrity in his community. Noah walked with God. Do you know anybody else in the Bible that says walked with God? There's this guy called Enoch. You might run into a crossword puzzle or a Jeopardy sometime. And all we know is that Enoch walked with God, and he was translated, the word they use. He just went to glory. He didn't die, Enoch. But Noah walked with God. It's interesting, that was the Message version. In the NIV it says, but Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time. He walked with God. There wasn't any church to judge him against. But you know how they're just good people, you know, growing up? Think about that person when you were a kid. You may not have known if they went to church or anything about them, but you knew they were good people. They may have been the place you would go if things were bad at home. You just knew they were good. And Noah was evidently one of those. In what tangible ways did Noah express his trust in what God had told him?
He built the ark.
Easiest answer on the paper.
Yeah.
He built the ark. He built the ark. And if you can read through, I used to love as a kid to read through all the descriptions of what the ark was supposed to be like, and cubits and these things, and gopher wood. Didn't you wonder what gopher wood was? I thought gopher was this little critter that got hit in the road all the time, you know. But you read it, and if you really visualize it, we always see it as this gigantic boat. Remember those pictures? And in fact, there's a Noah's Ark somewhere you can go and visit. When you read the description, it pretty much was a big old box that would float, because he didn't have to navigate anywhere. What happened when the rains came?
It floated.
It rose up, he floated around until he landed on Ararat. Not Ararat, Ararat, a mountain. But he did that. Huh. And again, remember, put it in context. He was way inland. You know that junkyard out on 581? It's off to the left as you're going out of town, and there's a boat in there. You ever notice that boat sitting in there? Anyhow, it's a big kind of a white boat. As a kid, we'd go by that all the time, and I always think, how in the world did a boat get up here in the middle of this junkyard? And that kind of reminded me of Noah and how he trusted. I don't even know that he knew what a boat was. Because sometimes God will ask us to do something, and we don't even know what that means. Or at least not the total what it means. He built an ark. He built an ark. What does Noah's example tell us about the relationship between confident trust in God and the hard work of preparation?
I guess he was just going on his, I don't know how to answer that, just going on his faith. I mean, that's a lot.
He claimed it, and he did it.
It goes hand in hand, trust and hard work.
If we really believe God's leading us to do something, we won't say, okay, sure, okay, and pray like crazy somebody else does it. You know, if we really feel we're going to put feet and hands, money and time to what God's leading us. And it's easy to get that unbalanced. I believe if he had just said, sure, God, I believe you're going to bring that flood and everything. Sure, I believe you. Yeah, that'd make a nice boat. Okay. You'd have drowned like everybody else. And then if you take the big view of this, then I guess God would have to start creation over again. But genuine faith always produces works of obedience. If we're really obedient. Did your mom ever say to you, just do what I told you? I don't know about you, but I used to like to try to split those hairs. If she told me to peel 6 potatoes, I'd try to peel 5. And the way I peeled them, I usually would peel 7 if she wanted 5. Sometimes we try to do that with God. Sure, I'll give you an hour on Sunday. No big deal. What, you want me to hold communion? I don't think so. Oh my gosh, you expect me to read something? I don't think so. brings out those works of obedience. And it also tells us that Noah just didn't build this boat on his own, right? Now, people looked at him crazy anyhow, but at least he could say, God told me to do it. Not the devil told me to do it. God told me to do it. Look at some of these verses. Verse 11. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on earth and had corrupted their ways. So God said to Noah, I'm going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I'm surely going to destroy both them and the earth. So make yourself an ark. This calls it cypress. I liked it better. It was gopher. Cypress wood. Make rooms in it and coat it with pitch inside and out. And then I love the details. That would have been fine. Just tell me it's going to be a big box. No, it's going to be 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. Make a roof for it and finish the ark to within 18 inches of the top. Put a door on the side of the ark and make lower, middle, and upper decks. Wow. I wish God would be that detailed with me. Can you imagine if Noah had to figure this out on his own, what he was going to do, how he was going to do that? Gives him really specific instructions. Do you think the fact that Noah actually heard God's voice helped him to obey God in building the ark? Explain why or why not. Oh, Wendy's face. Wendy's going,
I mean, you actually hear
yeah.
it. It's not your voice that you're hearing and you're actually hearing. You don't know if he's hearing it in his head or if he's hearing it outside. Like, build this ark. And yeah, I'm like, okay, I'll build it. You know?
It's almost a no-brainer.
Yeah.
And I like how you phrase that, because sometimes I believe when God speaks to us, it is like a voice in our head. There have been very few times I've actually, I think, auditorially heard the voice of God. Powerful motivation. Do you realize that there's a good chance? In Evan Almighty, that ark came together really quickly. It's a good chance it took him 120 years to build this ark. How much discouragement could come in 120 years? And we don't hear that God came back and repeated God's self. God said it, gave the specifics. In my mind, handed Noah a hammer and said, go for it. Go for it. But all during that time, he had to continue to believe. What kind of things, this isn't any questions, but what kind of things could have discouraged him or taken him off task?
People call him nuts, for one.
People calling him nuts. Anybody ever told you you're crazy about something about your God stuff? What else?
Hard work.
Hard work.
Materials, I would think.
Yeah, where are these trees coming from?
Yeah, exactly.
Doubting if you really heard it.
And even though people in this part of Genesis lived to be like really old people, he still was 120 years older when he got finished than when he started. How many of us say, oh, I can't do that anymore? I can't. So those kind of things could have...
What was he doing before this to feed and provide for his family? So would he not have to be still doing that along with building the ark? And that's maybe why it took so long.
And
is
see,
our time the same as back then?
We aren't told what he was doing before. We know what he did later. We weren't told that.
Feeding the critters when they show up. When did they show up?
And if they came in drips and drabbles, then he had to be able to figure out how to feed those. Also, I don't know, but oftentimes our friends, partners, husbands, wives get frustrated with us when we're focused on one thing. Yeah, but that garden needs weeding. I got to build the ark. These kids are in trouble. I got to build the ark. So there could have been a little bit of conflict there. Sometimes I think, oh, I wish I could read the Bible. Can you just add some cool things in? So it's obvious that he had to be truly believing that God had spoken to him to get into this. It wasn't just a little project. What were the conditions of human society just before the flood?
It's horrible. Like it is now, I think. Really.
Just plain old wicked. Just plain old wicked. And if you take the time, sometime you can go over into Matthew 24, because Jesus said the end times would be like as the days of Noah. Like as the days of Noah. Uncontrolled.
Sorry, what was it?
Matthew 24:37. Uncontrolled wickedness and violence. Now, I thought of it when Lori said like it is today. I thought that too, but I'm convinced that things aren't that much worse now than they've been before. We just hear about it more. This car accident that killed 20 people in New York, 25, 30 years ago, we may not even have heard of that. You know, before CNN 24 hours. I can almost hear Walter Cronkite talking about it. You know, but we hear so much about it. And we are more populated, compact. When I lived in Norfolk and Portsmouth down there, my mother was forever saying, "Oh, they always have shootings there." So every time there was one in Roanoke, I'd call Mom, "Did you hear there was a shooting over on 10th Street last night?" You know, because we get focused on that kind of thing. But things were really bad. Things were really, really bad. I'm going to verse 17. I'm going to bring floodwaters on the earth to destroy all life under the heavens. Every creature that has breath of life in it, everything on earth will perish, but I will establish my covenant with you. Noah's got these kids. We don't know that God talked to Noah's kids or Noah's wife. He's got these kids. What kind of problems would he have had keeping them focused on this project?
I think they were different back then.
I have 3 kids, so if there's a lot of trouble or whatever, there's a fight. So if you said it's corrupt or violence or whatever, then to keep them focused and not get into any trouble.
Again, remember, there are these sons, and all the rest of the world is uncontrolled. Violence, mayhem. How did Noah keep them on task?
You have to teach them faith. You have to teach them what you believe in the right way, and that's what I did.
He taught them faith, and also they saw him staying on course. Any of you that are parents, I'm sure there are times you just want, or you may in the past, want to just pitch a fit. And you may not be able to because here are these eyes looking at you. It's kind of like as a pastor, there's these eyes looking at you. You can't quite pitch that fit. Think again, let's go back to what Noah was dealing with. Noah had no Bible to refer them to. Noah couldn't say, now the Word of God says you're to do this and this and such. He had no Bible. He had no community of faith that we know of. He had no community of faith that we know of. He just was on his own with what God had told him. I think that must have been a very powerful man, but I don't see him as being dictatorial. I see him simply walking the walk. Example. Walked the walk with God.
But how did they didn't have a church, how did he know about God?
Good question. A voice of some kind spoke to him, and Scripture attributes that to God. When it gets to this kind of thing, I feel like I'm in a Star Trek episode, you know. But something led him to do this, and something told him what was coming on. It was also interesting that it was just this family. I believe it takes a village to raise people and keep us together and help us out. But Noah had to just trust God. Just trust God.
How many people could his family have grown in 120 years?
Scripture just kind of refers to that core family. But maybe they got on the first list. I don't know, but it's something to think about.
And if they didn't have a church, how do you say these people are corrupt?
What they had to judge it against. Yeah, that's another question too. What was the standard?
Well, if I kill you and you're dead, that would be bad. if you're a parent,
Maybe,
or if
but
it
maybe I
was
had
your-
something you wanted or needed, and you had to kill me to get it.
Well, you would know that was bad if I killed you.
How did you know it was bad?
Because if you say, let me see, if you run over a living thing, don't you feel that inside? Like a squirrel?
I never done that.
Right. Well, me neither.
I
but
understand,
it's
I get
an
what,
example,
I get what
yeah.
Betty's saying.
Yeah, I
We
get it.
they didn't have what we considered to be that guideline. Just like in this room, I could bring up 2 or 3 things and somebody would go, yeah, that's okay. And somebody else would go, But whatever it was, they were not living according like Noah was, like he felt like God was leading him to lead. It may have taken Noah 120 years to build the ark, and yet in all that time, it seems only his family believed his witness. What do these results tell you about God's expectations of God's followers?
Is that 8?
Believe in your faith and for your validation in God, not society.
Amen. Sometimes you have to believe in God's validation, whether society gets that or not. Evaluation based on our heart connection. We can't always base success on outward things either. You know, it's Troy was talking on, if you get a chance to watch the Founders MCC sermon that Troy gave last Sunday, he was talking about when the church started. And he said, the first Sunday we had 12. I'm not sure about these numbers. And the second Sunday we had 18. And the third Sunday we had 19. And the fourth Sunday we had 8. And he said, you're going to notice the numbers, but you can't ride just on those. God looks at our motives and our attitude. Our motives and our attitude. You know, we get caught up in that, don't we? For many years, my mother would say, when I was in ministry, when are you going to get a real job? And I have a real job, Mom. But you could go back to teaching. You could go back to the library. Thank goodness I never got into a real head-to-head with her on that. But that's, again, looking at the results. What it was is, in the Southern Baptist, she was a whole lot prouder to say she had a daughter that was a teacher, or that was a librarian, than a daughter that was a minister. Can't always go on what it looks like to the outside there. Just a little bit more of the Noah story. Because I can't just tell all this part without getting to the good part. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you will enter the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you. You will bring into the ark 2 of every living creature, male and female, to keep them alive with you, 2 of every kind of bird, every kind of animal, and every kind of creature. I've always been wondering why they didn't kill each other. Me too. You are to take every kind of food that is to be eaten and stored away as food for you and for them. Where did he get all that stuff? I don't know. And we're back to faith. But the important thing is verse 22. What's verse 22 say?
Noah did everything just as God commanded him.
Noah did everything just as God commanded. Obedient trust. Had it rained yet? No. Had the waters come up as the flood started? No. Have you ever wanted God to give you that sign? I used to want God to give me a post-it note. Just give me a little post-it note to know what's going to happen next. Even through this possibly 120 years, Noah did what seemed to be the impossible. Now, God's not going to ask any of us to go out tonight and lay in store for every kind of animal that we even see or have or own for ever how long. God's not going to ask us to go down to Lowe's and buy enough lumber. You know, it may be raining a lot. In Carolina, they may need an ark before it's over. We saw some of that damage on the way down. But what about the little things? What about the little things that God asks us to do? This question said, what is something difficult God is asking you to do? How does Noah's example encourage you? It's easy to think of some of the big things we hope God won't ask us. God's not going to ask any of us to go out and rob a bank and get enough money to pay off this building. If you do, don't get caught with your money. God's not gonna ask any of us, I don't think, to go get on a plane and fly to Indonesia and live there for the next 3 years helping people who are in the earthquake. Or to Haiti. Now, we may end up going there, but that's not gonna be something you're gonna hear probably on the way home tonight. But is there something small God might be asking us to do? What kind of thing might God ask us to do today? You don't have to say you, somebody.
Be faithful to him, to remember him.
To remember him. Maybe to be more vocal about our remembering him. It's Rhonda's word, remember.
More of a big thing is, for me, is to be more of a witness, for God, where I haven't done that so much in the past, and I feel like that's something.
Be a witness.
I think that one of the big things is not just about him asking us to follow him or whatever. It's you're setting, even if you make mistakes, you're trying to set examples for other people. But when you show love and kindness and support and help to people who need it, that shows that you're a true follower of Christ, not being judgmental, disrespectful, rude. You know, what we see a lot of people who say they're Christians or that they follow God, because I think that, of course, some of us have more empathy and more whatever for other people, but I think if you can just give something to a person in need, even a dollar, a kind word, something, that, and you keep yourself steady doing things like this, then you can stay within the faith that way, because you're an example, or you're trying to, you know what I'm saying? You're pushing yourself.
My experience has not been so much that God asked me to do great and mighty and hard and difficult and costly things. God may ask me just to be nicer to my neighbor. There's a person I used to listen to, Carolyn Mays, and she was at a radio program in California, and she was talking one night. She said, what if God's calling for you, God's purpose for you was to simply be the very best neighbor in your neighborhood? Would you be willing to do that? Some of us want to go be the missionary in Africa. Some of us want to do this or that. But if God's calling for you is to simply be the best neighbor in your neighborhood. I don't mean have the prettiest flowers. You know what I mean? The most compassionate, keep up with, figure out what people need. And her talk about that was the fact that God calls us so often to the little things. None of us got to go out and find gopher wood and build an ark. But we may need to say a kind word to somebody at work or in our neighborhood tomorrow. We may need, if somebody's on our mind, to simply call them up, real life call, or even, my gosh, send a actually written note to somebody to just say, you're on my heart, you're on my mind. Now, I know, and I'm 100% sure that each of us in this coming week, God's going to nudge us to do something. Can we be like Noah and simply be obedient and do it? Or will we just ignore it? And when I ignore those kind of nudges, it doesn't hurt the person that I didn't send it to. It hurts me. Because I think, woulda, coulda, shoulda. Woulda, coulda, shoulda. Noah's example was to do even what seemed strange and wild and crazy. Everybody around him, bless his family. Your daddy's building that big old boat. Is he crazy? What's a boat? What's rain? What's flood? But he stayed with it. So part of being a hero or shero of faith is making the hard choices. Next week, we're going to talk about believing the impossible. We're going to be talking about Abraham and Sarah. I love that story. Talk about some impossibilities. Nobody 100 around here is going to get pregnant. But that story, and the MCC person I'll be talking about is going to be Troy. So, thoughts, reactions, comments?
I never thought about not knowing what rain might be.
I can't hear you, I'm sorry.
I never thought about not knowing
what rain might be, or like the ocean, or never occurred to me.
It makes me wonder about the creation story itself in the garden. If they had everything they needed in the garden, I'm gonna play angel's advocate for a minute. If they had everything they needed in the garden, and then they lost it, and they were made to live off the land, they would have needed a water source, whether that was rain or not.
And there's some words that are used that imply that the water came up through the ground.
Yeah, and I remember reading about
Like
that as well.
springs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so, but a foreign concept of a flood, that just
Well,
blows my mind.
for many of us, we haven't lived through floods like they've had in Carolina and Texas and some of these places. I know there was a big flood here in '85, you know, but how many people before that could have imagined that kind of water running through the streets of Roanoke? So it's not too hard to imagine. They couldn't imagine that. Or do you remember some of the giganimous snows we used to get? I remember back in the '60s, there was one of the snow was up to my basketball goal in the backyard. Who would have thought it would snow like that? Who would have thought? So, go out tonight being willing, if God gives you that nudge. Our friend Jeannie used to call it a holy unction. If you get that nudge, it's a lot better to just go and do whatever little thing it is than to go, I'll get it later. But sometimes we're not promised later. Loving God, thank you for these faithful folks. Get us home safely in the rain tonight. And most of all, help us remember that you never ask us to do anything that you won't empower and enable us to do and walk with us through it. In your name we pray. Amen.
Do you know of any